Welcome to A New Life in France. We have a budget special where we are going to be talking to experts regarding the budget that's just happened in the UK. So this will be applicable to those still in the UK looking to move to France, and also for those people already living in France. So it will have implications. So we are joined by a couple of experts today, and they are joining us online. Without further ado, let's speak to them. Really great that Darren Fletcher from Chase Buchanan Wealth Management has joined us today, and we're going to get right into that nitty-gritty straight away to find out how it's actually going to impact you for those people who are living in France or those people who are looking to move to France. Darren, let's dive straight in. So we're going to dive straight into the questions that I've got for you. So the one thing for me is, can we have a look at some of those implications for the British expats, who are actually currently living in France?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that the biggest changes from the budget yesterday will be around changes to inheritance tax and changes to capital gains tax. There were some quite significant changes announced yesterday, effectively tightening the controls around both of those taxes. I think the first element is that the inheritance tax threshold has been frozen effectively through till 2028. Meaning that more of an individual's estate will form potentially part of a taxable estate on death. And obviously the knock-on effect is that is a bigger tax liability on the beneficiaries. And of course, a lot of British expats beneficiaries will be in the UK, and it will fall directly onto them. The other element is around capital gains tax, and we're already aware of the capital gains tax reduction to £3,000. This will obviously have an impact on properties, potentially on buy-to-let properties, and ultimately will increase potential tax on those beneficiaries, even when they're outside of the UK. So this might actually, I guess, impact people on their decision-making on whether to liquidate their assets either before they make an international move or after they've made an international move. And I think the important thing is, and will be, to make sure that you take advice on your personal situation and your personal assets.
Darren, I think, one of the big things that came out of yesterday's budget as well is that whole thing around inheritance tax and pensions. Just tell us a little bit more. What are those impacts?
So absolutely. I mean, there were some big announcements yesterday around inheritance tax, and in particular around pensions. So historically, and I say historically prior to yesterday, pension funds are generally exempt from tax. They're taxed later in life upon death, but earlier in life, they certainly weren't. The announcement yesterday effectively extends that to all pension funds and brings all pension funds from April 2027, into the calculations for inheritance tax. And what that means is that individuals will now need to give consideration to how they look at those pensions and how they interact with this potential inheritance tax moving forwards. We already know that there's a freeze on the threshold, which will mean that, again, more of your pension fund will fall within that and potentially is taxable. And I think what it will probably mean is that there will be more of a need to start to explore more comprehensive estate planning to protect the assets that you've built up through your lifestyle. And I think one of the other things is making sure from a government perspective is that it stops some of that pension funds transferring tax-free to their heirs, to their beneficiaries. And I think from an expatriate perspective, it will then be looking at whether or not it's the right thing to retain UK-based pension schemes or possibly convert the pensions into other financial instruments, particularly given, there'll be different tax treatments in different jurisdictions as well, and those things will obviously need to be taken into account. There were lots of other underlying announcements yesterday around pensions and particularly people moving offshore. And I think it will just take some time for that information to come out in the wash, for everybody to get a full understanding of exactly how it will be implemented and how it will affect people. But again, I think a bit like with properties, with buy-to-let properties, with investment portfolios, you need to seek professional advice with regard to your pensions if you're living in a non-UK country.
One of the other questions as well, and it's quite an interesting one. There are a number of people who move to France now and expats, but they still have a foot back in the UK as well. And I think, things like national insurance potentially is going to have an impact on that as well. And also, again, looking at overseas income, what are your thoughts on that?
So yeah, there were some changes made to national insurance contributions yesterday. Primarily, those contributions are aimed at employers. We're acutely aware in the international space that some British expatriates will, as you rightly say, have a foot in the UK and a foot in France, for example, meaning that they could be drawing incomes in both places. I think for an employee, they probably won't necessarily notice that difference because the tax will fall on the employer. However, if you are an employer and employee in the same breath, this could well have an implication for you. And I think it's just about, I guess it's the higher earners that will affect. So the people that have a higher UK income in addition to their overseas income. So I think it's, again, it just adds an extra level of compliance complexity to your overall planning on how you and where you draw your income moving forwards.
Darren, in your professional opinion, what do you think some of the impacts are going to be on non-residential UK property owners?
So non-residential property or non-resident property owners will also be impacted by the increased capital gains tax and the IHT inheritance tax adjustments. What this ultimately will do is it will probably prompt those people to reassess their property holdings. A non-resident landlord will face a rising tax burden, and that may well make them reconsider their UK property investments. Or just plan some additional estate planning to manage these increased taxes effectively. But certainly it will have an impact on these people.
Darren, a lot happened yesterday and a lot of things came into effect pretty much at midnight as well. So there was very little time for anybody to do anything. But how do you think things like the currency market is going to be impacted? But also, what about pension transfers?
So, I mean, this wasn't directly addressed in the budget yesterday. The broader economic tightening could well indirectly impact the exchange rate and more importantly, the exchange rate stability. And ultimately, that would have a knock-on effect to pension transfer values for expatriates. The Treasury haven't yet adjusted the regulations specifically related to cross-border pension transfers. You should absolutely remain vigilant to any potential changes that could well arise during the next fiscal year.
Darren, also, there was a lot in there. I think, we've covered a lot of the key points, but what other things do you think we should just be aware of? People listening into this and go, I'm in France, but also I've still got my UK interests as well. What other things did you pick up on from the budget?
Yeah, I mean, if we look more generically at taxation in the UK, personal allowances and rates of income tax won't change in 2025-26 or 26-27. So there is some stability. Obviously, as income increases, there's an increase in tax liability. But what they have announced is that after 26-27 tax year, personal allowances will increase in line with inflation. So we should start to see an increment in tax-free allowances in income. I guess, as I mentioned already, one of the biggest changes is around capital gains tax. If you're a basic rate taxpayer in the UK, the rate will move to 18%. And if you're a higher rate taxpayer or an additional rate taxpayer, this rate will move to 24%. And I think the other thing is that the distinction between gains on, say, a residential property and then other assets has been abolished. And the increased rates apply. So they apply from the day before the budget. So they apply effectively from the 29th of October 2024. So I think that they're key rates and key things that we should consider. I think if we think around the pension changes that we've talked about already, we know that inheritance tax will apply to unused pension pots from April 2027. And this will include all UK pensions and indeed QNUPs. So QNUPs is effectively a qualified non-UK pension scheme, which can be quite attractive for expatriates. There is a consultation on this, though, and the consultation is going to last about 12 weeks and should end by the end of January. So it may be there are some tweaks around that, but I would suggest that the course of the path has been laid. So it will probably just be minor amendments around that. We also know, I mentioned a little bit a few minutes ago around overseas pension schemes, so cure-ops, also known as, and we do know that the overseas transfer charge, which historically is charged on funds over the lifetime allowance of 1,075,000, effectively a rule has been changed to remove the EEA, UK and Gibraltar exemption, which historically would have allowed a UK resident to take a higher level of tax-free cash. This is effectively been removed effective immediately as well. So that will have some knock-on effects to pensions as well moving forwards. There's a few other couple of changes that have been made around stamp duty. So stamp duty has been increased on second properties and non-natural persons. There's an increase in tax on that as well. And then there's some other minor changes that probably don't affect the vast majority around agriculture and business property relief and so on and so forth. So yeah, there's definitely the budget, I guess, in summary, has definitely been used as a tool to significantly increase the tax take. A lot of that burden, I guess, has fallen on employers. So Rachel Reeves announced that around about 25 billion will be collected over the next decade around the changes to national insurance. So that fills a large chunk of the whole. A lot of the rest of the announcements in the UK, as I've mentioned, increased capital gains tax, increases the potential take on inheritance tax, freezes personal allowances. The ISA allowance won't change. That's been set in stone and won't change till 2030. So that creates a period that, although UK residents should absolutely try to use their ISA allowances every year, it will ultimately diminish in time the amount that can be held within that.
Darren, thank you so much for joining us today. There was a lot to take in. I mean, it's probably only been 12 or 18 hours. I'm sure you've been up all night trying to sort this out for your clients and go through, and really appreciate you giving us your time today to be able to impart some of this great knowledge and information to our viewers.
No, absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. And I look forward to forming part of any future webinars that you do.
Well, that was great for Darren to be able to join us today. And as I said to him just at the end, just trying to collate all that information overnight and just come to us and give us some information and some advice. What will also be happening probably later in November, we'll be revisiting the full impacts. There's a lot happening, all sorts of things going on. It is changing all the time. But we will be coming back with our friends over at Chase Buchanan Wealth Management, and they are going to be running one or two seminars with us where we can give you more information about looking at how we can navigate now through the budget and the impact it will have for those people who are living in France. We are now going to go over to our next expert. We are actually heading over to David Newson from Smart Currency Exchange based in the UK. And David is a regular here on the show with us and a great supporter of the channel. We're going to talk to David and find out a little bit more how currency is going to be affected probably in the coming days, but equally probably in the coming weeks and even months. David, great to see you here today. Thank you so much for joining us. Why don't we just dive in and just see what is the impact that the budget's had on those currency markets right now, and how do you see this all going to change? From your perspective, has there been an immediate impact on currency, or what do you see is going to happen in the coming days, coming weeks, coming months?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Phil. So, yeah, yesterday, obviously, we had the widely anticipated autumn budget. And, it revealed a number of expected tax rises. I think you can argue that it was widely known that tax rises were coming, not the exact details, but that perhaps a lot of it was already priced into the currency markets. So sterling euro was at a high since spring 2022, around the 1.2 level. So really strong levels for someone who is looking to buy in France, move to France, move sterling into euros over there. After yesterday's budget in the afternoon, exchange rates did slightly drop. So sterling euro did slightly drop, but it started to regain ground now and recoup some of yesterday's losses. So it's not had a huge immediate impact, but there's a bit of a lack of UK data today, so we might see a bit more movement today. Obviously, we've got a lot of events next week as well with US elections, Bank of England's decision on interest rates as well. So we expect to see, more volatility over the coming weeks, that's for sure. So for someone looking to move to France and purchase a property or buy a holiday home, perhaps, the question is, why are exchange rates so important? And do they actually affect me in any great way? And the answer is yes. So fluctuating exchange rates hugely affects someone buying a property in France, someone who isn't holding euros already for their purchase. We all know that, I suppose, exchange rates might not be the first thing, in the front of people's minds when they're thinking about moving to France or buy a property in France. But politics and elections, events like yesterday, events that we're going to see next week, they all create uncertainty in the markets and cause exchange rates to be volatile. It's not unknown for exchange rates to move 5%, often at unexpected times. And if you start applying those percentages to your personal budget, the cost of your property you're looking at buying, you really start getting a feel of, what impact this is going to have me personally and on my finances. So the point here is moving exchange rates hugely impact a client's budget, the sterling cost of the euro property that they are purchasing. So why does this affect a French purchase so much? Exchange rates, currency markets, they affect all overseas property purchases, but it's even more evident with France due to the time frames between signing the contract and actually completing on that property purchase. So when buying in France, there's roughly 3 months between signing the initial contracts, something called the compromis, and that's when you're agreeing to buy the property. So there's 3 months between signing the compromis and completion, when you actually have to pay the euro balance of your property to the notaire. So when you're signing the paperwork, you're obviously agreeing to buy, you're agreeing a euro figure, the euro cost of that property that you will pay to the notaire in 3-4 months' time. And obviously, fluctuating exchange rates will dramatically impact the sterling cost of that property. The euro figure stays the same, but the sterling cost will move up and down with exchange rates. So essentially, if you don't manage your currency exposure, you do not know how much that property in France is going to cost you once you get to completion. And it's something that we call internally here at Smart currency risk. So you could find yourself in a position where that property is costing you more in pounds, in sterling, once you get to completion, and perhaps even more than you've actually budgeted for. And that's why these events are so, create such an impact on people when they are looking to buy, because it moves rates so much. Something we say to clients a lot is, you wouldn't buy a property in the UK without knowing the final costs. You just wouldn't. So why would you do this when buying in France? It's vital you manage your currency exposure, remove that currency risk, and just protect your budget, protect the cost of your property in your home currency.
David, right now, lots of people will be wondering, what do they do? There'll be people already in that chain ready to buy, and they're going to exchange in the next 2, 3, 4 months. There'll also be people looking to move from the UK now, probably prompted by that budget. But if people have got money sat there and they've got it sat there in sterling, what can they do to protect their position versus the euro right now?
Yeah, sure. And it's a good question, because obviously, people are at different stages of the process. So I suppose number one, if you're in the early stages of thinking about buying in France, or, information gathering perhaps, it's never too early to engage with us. As I said earlier, exchange rates play a huge role in this process. So there are different options for you. If you're in early stages, it's always worth having a conversation with us, learning more about those options, learning more about how you can actually, mitigate your currency exposure, remove that currency risk. Just feel comfortable with these options. So once you do get further down the line, you have the knowledge and you can make an informed decision on, the next steps. For those people who are a bit further down the line, we might have people who are signing the compromis, it's being drawn up and they're signing the compromis in a few weeks or a month, and they're looking at transferring, a deposit payment over to the notaire. it's vital that they're speaking to us. They're speaking to one of our dedicated account managers who are experts in this field. So, we're there to obviously help with that deposit payment over to the notaire. It's a very quick transfer. But after that, really need to be making decisions on the balance payment, because like I said, there are different options. So one of our most popular products when buying in France, something called a forward contract. Like I said earlier, exchange rate movements affect the cost of a client's property. A forward contract completely removes that risk. It's very popular when buying in France. It allows a customer to fix the exchange rate for a future date. We're at really strong levels, 119, 120, the best levels we've seen in the last couple of years. So if, compromises are being signed and there's completions in the coming months, that decision should be made about, should I be locking in at these levels? Should I, fix the exchange rates, A, remove my currency risk, B, secure the cost of this purchase in my home currency in pounds. So, like I said earlier, it's never too early to engage with us, find out more about the options, make an informed decision, particularly vital if you're already in that process of making offers, negotiating, or signing paperwork in the coming months.
David, you mentioned earlier events next week as well. Not only did we have the budget yesterday, but next week we've obviously got the Bank of England statement. We've also got the US elections. Is that going to have an impact as well, do you think?
Yes, it definitely will. So Bank of England interest rate decision next Thursday, US elections on Tuesday. Both of these events will affect sterling. In which way, you can take a guess, but we're not entirely sure. And at what levels, we do not know. I suppose the important thing here is to be prepared. When dealing with someone like Smart Currency, you do get access to a dedicated account manager. So you have one point of contact. So it's always worth having that person ready at the end of the phone. This is the person who's going to work with you, keep you updated on exchange rate movements. What effect are these events going to have on your personal finances? So keep those those communication levels up, speak to the team, and let's see what next week brings. But it's definitely going to have an impact. It's going to be an exciting one, as well as with the budget as well. It's going to have an impact.
David, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been great just to share that information for our viewers so they can really digest that, and obviously they can start to make some decisions. And I think, as you say, it's really interesting how things are going to pan out now through today, tomorrow, and of course going into next week as well. But thank you again for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.